Wonder if everyone could take a seat. It's 5:59. Off? Do you actually, does it like talk to you?
It has before, yes.
Even when I've got it on silent. Yeah, I was in a meeting today, and it starts, oh, can I help you? Sorry.
And another thing, the flashlight turned on, and I don't have the flashlight out. And I couldn't get it off. I had to shut down the whole phone. It's weird.
Okay, so it's not just me. Okay, all right. Well, I'm sure if I said this to my kids, they'd roll their eyes and say, We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Mathey.
Here.
Alderman Sage.
Here.
Alderman Mwambwe.
Here.
Alderman Burgess. Here. Alderman Painter.
Here.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Black. Alderman Hallman.
Here.
Alderman Bray. Here.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. Did you receive any cards for public comment?
No, there was no public comment.
Okay. Wow. Another time to call Ripley's, believe it or not. Yeah. At this point, we have consideration of approving committee of the whole minutes from November 19th, 2018. And is there a motion to approve, or are there corrections? What's the pleasure of the council?
I'll make a motion to approve them as presented.
Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll? We can.
Alderman Mathey.
Yeah.
We can.
We
Yeah,
can do
you
the.
can do it by there
I'm
if you'd like.
sorry.
That's
I
okay.
apologize. We can do it this. Okay. There are some things I know that we have to do the other way. Sorry. And.
Her name was upside down. I couldn't sit here for an hour or so.
Oh. We don't want to do that.
He was kicking in.
Oh, and we're voting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And Alderwoman Howman, could you vote on that? We're doing electronic voting. Yeah, it's not your fault. It's my fault because I was, for whatever reason, thought that we didn't have to. The motion carries 8-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk. And we move then right along to our presentation of our Comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our city manager and Jay Tetzloff. Mr.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is something that I'll turn over to Jay immediately. I think everybody's seen the at least the draft discussion, and this is something that we're anxious to make a presentation to council and the community. Jay.
Good evening. I just wanted to give just a kind of a really quick, I guess, history, bringing back history to this before time comes up. So if you remember a couple years ago, David Hills had $100,000 for 2 feasibility studies, one for O'Neill, one for a recreation center. I went to him and talked to him and said the Parks Master Plan is from 1997. We've had 2 updates, but we really need to update that with new directors, new city manager, and other staff. Just felt there was a strong need. So so there really was 3 pieces. There was a feasibility study for a rec center, feasibility study for O'Neill, and you guys have heard some of those numbers, and we've used some of those numbers when we talked about O'Neill Aquatic Center. What we're talking about tonight is the comprehensive plan, the comprehensive master plan. So I wanted to make sure that I kind of brought that up. We're only talking about one piece of the 3 that is in front of you tonight. Also, the goal for me is that you ask all your questions you have, because Tom will not be here next time. So I don't have to answer all your questions. He can answer your questions. So feel free to ask any questions you have tonight. And the goal, depending on the discussion, will be a vote for next Monday. But that all depends on where the discussion goes tonight, right? So, and that no funding is attached to this plan. That's important to understand as well. Is no funding is attached to this. So it's you've seen the recommendations, you've seen the plan as a generality, but there is no funding designated with this plan. So with that, I'm going to call Tom Deal from Greenplay up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me a few moments of your time.
Welcome.
Real
Thanks.
quick, I'm with Greenplay, and I have over 30 years of experience in park and recreation, so I've operated facilities and everything, and just so you have that sense. This is a comprehensive master plan. The word comprehensive is key. It's, system-wide. Let's just see if I have your controls properly. Page down. There it is. Real simple meeting agenda. We're just going to quickly talk about the planning process, talk about the final recommendations, and make sure we have plenty of time for any questions and for me to provide some answers. So this is part of the planning context. I was here with the strategic kickoff with Dylan, who was our project manager, and Jay and Eric some time ago back in June. And as you can see, it's a very comprehensive lists and tasks, and we've gone through all of those. And we're now at the phase 5 or 4, the draft and final needs assessment and draft presentation and so forth. And as Jay said, the O'Neill Park Master Plan was a separate project, and the Recreation Center feasibility study were separate projects. And I worked on those with Jay and Eric as well. So I want to talk about the general recommendations. I think you've had a chance to look at these. I don't want to read all the words that are up there for you. I'll just kind of give you the highlights. The first thing is, the first recommendation talks about GRASP. That's an analysis that Green Play and Design Concepts have developed and have done hundreds of projects together, and they compare parks and facilities in different agencies. And basically, in looking through that, it indicated that there was a need for some higher level of service in some of your parks. So what's recommended in the second bullet is to add some new elements to your park. And the third bullet is recommending that you develop site-specific master plans for each one of your parks. That was not part of the scope of this project. This slide, some of the key things to highlight is just to continue to look at your partnerships and your intergovernmental agreements, update them as necessary, look at existing ones and look for new ones. And down at the bottom is to work with the planning department to update your GIS mapping of all of your parks so it's accurate. There were some discrepancies there. These recommendations, basically, it's to develop a capital improvement budgets for your parks, and we're talking about quality over quantity. So there is some discussion about possibly repurposing some of your parks. So we didn't give you specifics about each exact park. That would be where you do a site-specific park master plan, but we believe you should be focusing on the quality. And then, as I said, consider repurposing some of your components. Here we're recommending that you continue to address the ADA compliance issues, and that's something that you should just constantly be doing. We're recommending that you update your codes and ordinance to reflect what are our recommendations for parks per acre. And then finally, we're recommending that again, here you're partnering with the planning department to update all your GIS data sets for parks and all the components. We talked about trail and walking path recommendations. We recommend that you continue to identify new trails within the city and to maximize any opportunities you have to connect to the different regional trails. We're recommending that you add new trailheads and connections wherever possible. And then just wanted to point out that walking is one of the #1 activities nationally that we're seeing as far as fitness and exercise and recreation, so that's a very important component. Here we're talking about where you should update and renovate some of your parks, and we're recommending that you add some high demand components to address the new trends that are out in our industry, and they're detailed there. For instance, maybe explore adding fitness stations or equipment, canoe and kayak launches, and so forth. And recommending that you look at your demand for athletic fields and update the conditions of the fields. The other thing we're recommending is that you look at the trends that are all across the nation and the region, and we've given you some recommendations to consider, things like dog parks, skateboarding, more community events, things like that. And the bottom bullet is to look at the benches and your site furnishings and come up with a standard. A lot of your benches are starting to show their age, and you should come up with a specific standard of how you'd like to have them replaced, and then actually develop not only the standard but also a replacement schedule. Here we're talking about developing an asset management plan for all of your assets and some replacement and life cycle, so you have an understanding of how long they're anticipated to last and when you're going to be looking to replace them. I think this talks a little bit more about tracking the life cycle of your play apparatus and the different hardware and the associated hardscapes. We're also recommending that you classify several of your parks. We have them listed here. We went through, I think, and reclassified your parks in a standard that we've used, and there's some that still need to be addressed. We recommend that you evaluate the maintenance for your, evaluate and prioritize improvements for your condition and maintenance of your parks, so that you have a list and you can start putting prices to those. And again, we've identified that in the master plan, but you're going to need some site-specific plans for each park. And then we're recommending that you look to improve your field conditions. A lot of your fields have drainage issues or under drainage, need some regrading and so forth. So we're recommending that you do a thorough look at your fields and put some, consider putting some capital improvement funds aside for that. Let's see here. I'm just trying to give you the bullet points. Establish a deferred maintenance list is one of the recommendations that we have. I think there's things that agencies keep deferring and deferring. You need to get them on a list and prioritize them and make sure they don't just keep being deferred. We recommend that you continue with your tree replacement program. That's been going well, but you need to continue to do it and pay special attention to the elm or ash borer. And then finally, we recommend that you evaluate the amount of bluegrass that you have and mow and maintain. That's quite costly to maintain all of that, so maybe to look at some other thoughts, low mow turf or native prairie or pollinator areas. So we're looking at giving you some ways that you might be able to reuse that space. We're recommending that you continue recreation programming and that you focus new programs for the demands and the trends that are out there. So not just keep doing what you're doing, but to take a look at the programs, add new programs, retire ones that aren't being effective. We're recommending a full service assessment of your programs, and that you also review the programs that are duplicated that you might be able to reduce if you're doing them in two different places where it could be done in one, or it might be being duplicated in the community. We're recommending that you look for programming for young adults, for people, young families, and also to pay attention to the active and aging adults. What adults are looking for, and some people call them seniors, some people call them aging, isn't what it used to be. It's not just sitting at a table playing cards. It's much more active. We're recommending that you continue to add community special events. We've heard a lot of requests for those from the community, so you should look for opportunities for those. They're community gathering opportunities. And then finally, look for partnerships for more indoor opportunities and shared outdoor opportunities to maximize your potential programming. We're recommending that you do an assessment, a full architectural assessment of your indoor facilities, a service assessment of other providers in the area as well, to try to determine what gaps you have in indoor facilities and what needs for renovations, repurposing, replacement of your indoor facilities. And then finally, we're recommending that you continue to look at partnership and sponsors, explore revenue sources, we're recommending a full cost recovery study. There's ways you can do a cost recovery to take a look at what you're charging in fees and how that money is being spent to pay for it, to make sure that your resources are properly being allocated. And then we're also giving you some recommendations as far as marketing goes, to add some marketing resources, and I think I just meant a person who's been added in marketing, so that's good. And to look at communication with partners and programs, look for additional multicultural opportunities, to evaluate the scheduling of your facilities and your programs, and then finally to address the perception of the East-West. And from what our study shows, the West Side does have many facilities, and I think you need to help get that across to the community so there's not a perception that they're not being taken care of in the West. I think those are the slides that we have, so I'd like to open it up to questions.
Questions from the council? Comments?
I tried to move
Alderman Mathy.
I just want to say thank you for putting this together. There's multiple different things that I've been talking about for a while that are in here. One of the things before I was on council, I went through the Bloomington 101 class, and I distinctly remembered Jay talking about the number of man hours we spend mowing grass in the city every year. And I think at the time it was 12,000 hours per year. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So I've had a conversation with Tim multiple times saying, what can we do to reduce that number down? And is that involve planting more pollinator grasses, native wildlife areas, more walking paths? Tipton Trails is hugely popular for people walking through all that area. Are there other parks we can convert to that same area? Because my understanding is we spend a lot of time loading and unloading equipment to mow various little wiggly bits of grass here and there all over the communities. And the more of those every year we can change back into or pollinator gardens or whatever that don't have to be mowed all the time, I think the better off we'll be in the long term. So I was happy to see that. I was also happy to see that the plan talks about fewer parks with better and more amenities in those parks for much the same reasons, with the maintenance costs associated with getting people to the parks to take care of them is a significant portion of our time. So I was very happy to see that in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Have you come to any general sense of the whether we should divest ourselves of the Lincoln Leisure Center or what its future might be for us?
No, it was a more comprehensive, higher
Higher level?
Yeah, we didn't get down into the weeds specifically for that.
Okay, so thinking at that higher level then, can you see that we might shrink some of our facilities and holdings?
I think the first thing was looking at the number of parks and the quality of the parks, and then we're recommending that assessment of your facilities to take a look at how well they're used and what their condition is, and then go from there. So if the condition of a facility is in such a shape that it's going to cost a lot of money, then it might be not recommended to continue with that. But that's not what we were able to do during this scope.
And I was really glad to see the continued recommendation of partnerships. I think particularly some of the pocket parks, the mini parks are, there's a lot of neighborhood interest in those and in helping to keep those up and add to them.
Okay.
Alderman Miller-Wamboy, excuse me.
Okay, thank you. So I was also interested in the suggestion that we kind of pare down some of the parks. But I've always believed that parks are kind of a gathering place. It's almost like the the living room, of a neighborhood or community where everybody kind of comes together. So if we do that, then that means that we might be going more to a maybe a regional kind of thing, or either way, what I'm curious about is what do we do then instead of that, so that people still have an opportunity to kind of get together and get to know each other
We're
on the
not talking
neighborhood
about,
level. Sure,
we're not talking about going to the regional
sure, yeah.
level. We're looking at, you only have so many resources, and
Hmm.
rather than trying to have everything, making what you have a better quality.
Right.
So taking a look at where there's multiple parks that are serving that population, and instead of maybe three, could one be repurposed and two have better amenities, and would they be better used? It's not so much, closing them down. It might be repurposing them, changing what the amenities are
Okay.
or what the activity is.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Mhm.
And then the other question that I have, I know this does not necessarily address funding, but I'm just interested in your opinion in terms of what you've seen nationally. Obviously this is, um, we have a lot of challenges in terms of funding, facilities and then different infrastructure, but I'm curious what you've seen as sustainable models out there.
Green Play has done over 500 projects since 1999, and what we're continuing to see is communities investing in parks and facilities, the quality of life, the economic benefit, brings jobs, brings people to your community, all within reason in what a community can afford. But we're seeing people continuing to invest in their parks. Adding walking trails is huge, making sure that the community has appropriate facilities, and looking at what's available in the community as well as what the parks and recreation can supply or provide. So that's kind of where the partnership comes in. You don't want to duplicate something that's already being done, but as times get even tougher for people, more people are looking to parks for services. They want to go there to walk, they want to go there to recreate, they want to go there to gather, they want to go there to do activities. So I think we're seeing continued growth. Mhm.
Alderwoman Bray.
Thank you, Mayor Renner, and thank you very much for the study and all your hard work. Your project team has really delivered some interesting data to us. I have several questions, kind of like how the data connects maybe with some other concepts. So um, if that in one point in the recommendations and here in the larger report, you've made mention that there were some mapping inaccuracies in regards to connecting territory and the like. And I'm just wondering, were those inaccuracies then, would they have affected some of the population analysis and whether or not we had the correct level of service for the population that we're serving?
The landscape architect firm that we worked with took all of that into consideration. They're just recommending that the maps that the city has in the planning department, we didn't believe were accurate from the GIS standpoint. So it's just getting those all cleaned up. Our person went on site and walked every one of your parks and looked at all of your amenities.
And then the population numbers were
Yes.
accurate for Bloomington, is
We
what I
believe
heard you
so.
say. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mayor, I have several other questions. You want me to continue,
Yes.
or I don't want to
I don't see
monopolize?
any other lights on, so go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we have some concepts here about divestiture, and you've made a couple recommendations about doing some further study of repurposing and the like. So I want to kind of get in the weeds a little bit with that and talk a little bit about, some mechanisms you would use to identify which parks would be best to divest, for instance. So if to me, what comes to my mind is, all right, did we track the use of the various parks? If we have a park sitting out there that gets very little usage, would that be a park that would be ripe for possible study and review for divestiture? In the larger report, I don't think I saw anything about usage rates, or please refer me to that section.
Parks are very difficult to track the usage. They're not like buildings where you have a door counter so you're tracking activities that you're aware of and so forth. And a park may not have a lot of activities simply because it doesn't have the appropriate amenities. So that's a tough one. What we're recommending more is to look at where you have multiple parks that are serving a population, and then take a look at which of those parks has the amenities and the potential to have better quality, which parks doesn't have as many amenities or doesn't have the potential to go to the quality that you'd like it to be, and then take a look at that and consider upgrading the parks that have the potential and the park that doesn't, potentially repurposing it. Doesn't mean, necessarily eliminating it. It may be just becomes more green space and less amenities, or could have another use.
Thank you for that. So we've talked about repurposing, and you've touched on green space. What are some other good techniques for, or other uses, the new purposes for parks that you've seen?
Well, sometimes we see them used more for community events. We see them just becoming more passive parks, where a trail or a walkway is involved, and it might not have all of the other amenities. It can become a themed park as well.
Thank you for that. When I look around Bloomington, I see what I consider, in my parlance, a suburban city. In other words, I don't feel like we have an urban feel to our city. We don't have a lot of high-rise living and the like. And so I wonder, does that impact this portion of the study that relates to population density and then the level of park service that you would
Yes, we looked at a
identify?
combination of the demographics of Bloomington, and then our person who did our study, the GRASP study, looked at the density that was near parks, did look at things like walkability, drivability, and things like that. And those are all guidelines or standards. It's not an exact science that, you have to have a park within a 5-minute walk. That's not always possible. And they also combine it as component-based with the different amenities and elements in the park. So that's how we looked at it. And yet we were aware of the layout of your city, the number of people who lived in what portions of the city, ages, economics, all of that were looked at.
I mean, parks serve lots of purposes, obviously gathering and having a place to do activities, but at the same time, they're very functional because if you have a dog, but you live in a high-rise, you need a park or a
Right.
place where you can go and recreate your dog or give your dog breaks, versus if you live in a more suburban community, like generally, Kim's parlance, we see in Bloomington, folks have green space availability in the form of yards or the like, that they can avail themselves of that for that daily activity that could be the dog need for breaks and the like.
Yes.
So I just wondered how that, so you're saying it's kind of an inexact
Well,
science, is
I
what
think
I
we
hear
felt
you
there was a
saying.
good disbursement of your parks, and there were a few areas that might have been short on parks, but when we looked deeper into it, it was commercial areas and low density or not high density at the time. It might become more neighborhoods in the future, then you'd have to reassess that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And finally, you talked about a cost recovery study. And it just, in your experience, what are some of the common techniques that are used in cost recoveries?
Well, when we're involved with it, we're doing one, for instance, in Alexandria, Virginia. We're doing one in Kirkland, Washington, and we've done several others. We come in and we look at all of the activities and programs that an agency does, and we look to categorize them as ones that benefit everyone in the community and ones that benefit fewer in the community. And in between, we have a pyramid, and there's 5 different levels. We try to place the categories of service in those different locations. And then we try to look at what the fees are, and we also look at the cost recovery. So what it's actually costing you to do the different activities. And then based on that, it helps lay out your fee structures, and it makes we do it through community involvement. So we actually have workshops where we invite the community in and have them tell us is a group exercise class, is that program, is that at the bottom of the pyramid where everyone can benefit, or is that at the top of the pyramid with few benefits? We do that with dog parks, we do that with all the different activities, and we try to get a sense of that, and it helps sort out what the potential fees maybe should be and what your level of cost recovery should be. Theoretically, if very few people benefit from it, it probably shouldn't cost an agency a lot to do it because it's not fair to everyone else. If everyone in the community benefits from it, that's typically the things that you try to pay for with your base budget as opposed to user fees. Parks is a perfect example. Theoretically, everyone can benefit from the use of a park. You don't have someone standing there collecting a fee or checking ID as you enter a park. Where if you go to a specific program, there might be a registration for that or something. It's a more specific group.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Burgess, and then Alderman Sage.
Thank you. I think one of the things that surprised me about this report was the acknowledgement that in terms of acres of parkland per person, we're actually below average. And that surprised me because I think that's contrary to many residents' perceptions of our city and also our aspirations for what the city is. But I did really appreciate your approach to dealing with that you didn't just make a blanket recommendation, oh, you're below average, you need to fix that by adding parks. You took a much more pragmatic approach and said, okay, well, we recognize this, and as a result, what we would suggest is instead of expansion, just adhere to the notion that what you do have is going to have to work harder and it's going to have to work smarter. Is that a fair
Yeah, we're recommending
characterization?
quality over quantity. Just to start putting parks all over the place that aren't of quality isn't the solution.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that because I think what will happen is it'll be a much higher level of service to our residents based on these recommendations. So I really appreciate that part of it. The only other comment I wanted to make is I was also interested in some of those barriers to access that were identified in your report, in this notion that you could be quite close to a park but still not have good access to it for various reasons. And I think this creates for our community or for our city an opportunity to take a multi-department approach to solving or alleviating some of these concerns. And the primary one, of course, is roadways. And we've done some of the work on that as a council in adopting a complete streets model. And I would think that continuing down that line in making our streets more easily accessible to all forms of transportation, including pedestrians, would help alleviate and remove some of those barriers so that, again, the parks that we have, we don't need to start putting more parks in, but the ones that we have are more accessible to more residents. But thank you for all of your hard work on this.
And I would agree with your assessment there. It's usually the transportation plan is outside the purview of Parks and Recreation. But to partner with someone in the city would be the way to go.
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. And also thanks for your presentation. A few minutes ago, you said adding walking trails is huge, I think is what you said. And so I'm wondering if you can provide just a little bit more detail or a little bit more context behind that statement, if you would. And now maybe I'll have a question or two
Certainly.
after that.
We find that walking trails and connectivity are two of the biggest things communities are looking at. We found some statistics out there. If you have a park and there's a place that most people enter, if you can have a walking trail or a path that goes around the park and comes back to the start, it can increase the use of the park by as much as 70%. I'm from out of town. I'm staying in a hotel. If the weather was nicer, I might want to go for exercise. So if I went out of my hotel and decided to run down the street, I don't know how far I need to run before I got to turn around to get back. I could run 3 miles and then be exhausted, and what do? Or I could run a mile and get back, and I only ran 2 miles, and I'm not. If it's a loop, you go around the loop once, and you get a sense of what that was like. So then you know every time you're coming to the park, you're looking to do 3 or 4 loops, and then over time you might build it up. But the other thing is you see all the activity going on in the park. So if your children are doing programs or other people are doing things, you actually get exposed to everything else that's going on, and you're more likely to become involved.
Okay. So taking that for just a second then, does that suggest that
where there are opportunities for new parks, then something that incorporates a walking trail would be a significant benefit or a significant added value to that park?
Most likely, it would, depend on the specific piece of property,
Sure.
but you'd want to make it connected and accessible, and then, depending on what the piece of property is, yes, if you can have a walking path around it, and some of the things we recommended were adding things like benches, adding outdoor fitness equipment, things like that. You're giving people more reasons to go there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Again, we appreciate your all your hard work on this and appreciate the information in the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, I'm sorry. Yes, you had one more question?
One more question.
Okay.
So, thank you very much for speaking more about the walking paths and trails, and I thought that was very exciting proposition, especially when in the larger report you coupled it with some economic development and talked about connecting up Constitution Trail, Route 66, and then creating connections that blend with the recreational opportunities with restaurants and retail opportunities. Is there, sometimes visuals really help me. Is there a particular place that, or a model that I could think about or check out that would incorporate kind of a park with this retail and restaurant idea that is
There's a lot of examples.
Interesting idea.
I'll have to give it some thought and get back to you for a specific one that would relate to Bloomington. But again, by the connectivity, people might walk from downtown or town hall or gathering place to a park and back. People go to a park, and because they can walk to a restaurant, they'll make more of a day of it. That's what we see.
I mean, you can mark things like the historic trail or something,
Yes,
things like
signage
that.
is
and
important.
Signage.
Yep,
Okay, I
and
see.
distance markers can be important.
Okay. Thanks again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it. Okay, now we'll move on to our next item, and I'm going to turn this over. It's a presentation on the 2020 budget overview to Mr. Gleason and Scott Rathman.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We've discussed FY20 in lesser detail with the introduction of the Finance Director report 5 months ago, but this is our first formal discussion on FY20, many next steps. Our approach to the budget was to predict for you and the community the most accurate budget as we possibly could. How is this done? Always a conservative and respectful approach to the use of taxpayer funds. Using historical trends as the best indicator, in some cases as far back as a decade. The goal is not to be ultra-conservative and leave budget dollars on the table when an exhaustive list of capital expenditures remain, and also to avoid being too optimistic in very challenging times. I mentioned many steps. We predict a surplus of $500,000 in the upcoming FY20 budget. This is not an anticipated ongoing source of revenue, but does allow council to direct what I will call one-and-done smaller capital projects. The budget also provides an additional $500,000 surplus in the capital projects fund, which was recently used to pay for the balance of the wayfinding signage a couple of weeks ago. Had a balance of about $900,000, and after action council took, that's down to about $500,000. This is an opportunity to potentially undo a trend where we've been forced in the past, recession and post-recession, where we're borrowing for some of our equipment purchases, such as vehicles. Much better practice to pay as you go, if we can. In upcoming meetings, I will also be providing council a menu of options on new revenue considerations that could be pledged or dedicated to capital projects that the community has discussed for many years. I believe exciting days ahead for the Bloomington community, and at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Finance Director Scott Rathman. Thank you.
Good evening. This is meant to be kind of a high level, not digging into the details too much, overview. I want to walk you through how we were looking at 2020 last year at this time. We were projecting a $2 million deficit using very conservative assumptions at the time. Walk you through how we got from the $2 million deficit to a $500,000 surplus, and then just kind of give you a real high sense of, the use of those funds for infrastructure improvements, and then finally kind of go through, what are the next steps. We're going to be having, I believe, one more meeting before we have the proposed presentation in late February, so we'll kind of gradually start doing some side-by-sides, getting into the details. This one, a little just more higher level. So a reminder, 2020 assumptions used during the FY19 budget. These were captured in the city manager's letter in the budget book. We didn't spend a lot of time discussing this, but with it around the city, with the staff, everyone was familiar. There was a $2 million deficit projected in that write-up. That you can picture the table where it goes out 5 years. 2020 showed $1.986 million deficit. How did we arrive at that? Well, revenues during the FY 2019 budget, we were concerned about our largest local employer, what the effects were going to be on the revenues, especially home rule sales tax. So we kept those revenues flat in the projection through the 5 years. A very conservative move. We kept those flat. Vacancy savings. Historically, we've been recognizing $1.5 million to $2 million. During 2018, we had a $2.5 million vacancy savings, but we kept the $500,000 that we used in the 2019 budget flat through the future years. Salaries and benefits. We used a blended 2.5% increase over the 2019 budget. That's not just for salary increases. That's health insurance. Police and health insurance goes up quite a lot, so blended 2.5% increase. And then the other expenses, commodities, contractuals, supplies, for streets, everything around the city, we used an approximate 1% increase for the 2019 budget. So using that, extrapolating that out, that's how we ended up with a $2 million deficit. Moving forward to this year, and running through the budget process and arriving at the $500,000 surplus, the current surplus. Now, we're still working on this number. I wanted to throw out, we've went through the departments, asked them for voluntary reductions to come up with additional money for capital improvements. It's incorporated in this $500,000. There's going to be a little bit more, but we've got $160,000 worth of cuts from the departments. These are just voluntary deductions from what their original ask was. But the material difference to the assumptions, revenues. You've been hearing me say this over the last few months. We're cautiously optimistic. It's turning into more than just optimism now. We're seeing increases. Property tax, that's a realized revenue increase that was voted on a month ago. Home rule is definitely trending favorably. Income tax, local use, that's the internet sales tax. We've increased that a couple $100,000 for 2020 over what we have in for 2019. Food and beverage has been trending very well. Interest income, that's another one I wanted to highlight. That's a couple $100,000 right there in interest income just from the interest rate increases that we're seeing. But that has a material effect when you're running high cash balances like we are fortunately able to do. Vacancy savings. We increased this in the budget to recognize historical trends. So the $500,000, here's a number I will officially put out there. We bumped that to $1.25 million. So that's a $750,000 offset in the budget that we're recognizing due to history. As I mentioned, we've been recognizing $1.5 million to $2.5 million. Last year was $2.5 million. That was the highest in the last 5 years. But $1.5 million to $1.75 million in vacancy savings every year. Salary and benefits. The projected costs were well below what we projected, primarily due to IMRF savings and health insurance. The health insurance, they implemented a health savings account, and I want to get this just right, the spousal eligibility exclusion policy that was put into place had a very material effect on our health insurance projections. Now, other expenses kind of went the opposite direction on us. That's actually increased over our projection that we were using last year. Fuel and repairs and maintenance. Older structures, we're having to address those around the city. There's an additional subsidy to the arena for some electrical that we need to do there, so there were some increases there. But still right now, $500,000 surplus due to favorable revenue trends and I will say good expense controls by the staff around the city. So given that, that provides us the opportunity to do some infrastructure improvements for the city. So first, the general fund, departmental, that's kind of our operating capital, improvements to the fire facilities, or just the facilities around the city, parks, public works. Right now we're projecting using, depending on our conversations about using surplus towards capital equipment instead of doing the lease. I'm going to segue here for a second. We're really looking at trying to wean ourselves off that capital lease. So this, for the departmental, we could be between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on how many funds we want to divert to paying cash for equipment. We're going to start doing that immediately with the enterprise funds, paying cash for equipment, except for storm. Storm's fund balance is a little bit challenged, but for sewer, water, solid waste, we're going to do a partial on solid waste using their fund balance, but we're going to start paying cash for equipment. I've already mentioned this, but the departmental capital improvements are funded via our surplus dollars. Tim had mentioned that we do have some additional funds available in the capital improvement fund. When the council approves the capital improvements for the coming year, we set up transfers into the capital improvement fund based on that. If those projects are not executed, those funds will stick in the capital improvement fund. They become available for other projects or for projects the following year. And then the final amount pending budget balancing, additional dollars that we're going to find or additional dollars we may divert to capital equipment will move the amount available for capital improvements for the departments up or down. I wanted to highlight the BCPA. Now, these are restricted dollars. It's part of the general fund. It's not part of our budgetary fund balance of the 19+ million. These were raised via the Capital Campaign and Community Foundation, but the BCPA is going to be fixing the roof and the HVAC system on the Creativity Center. We kind of categorize those together. Streets and sidewalks and alleys, $5 million. Everyone's very familiar with the first bullet there, the 4.6. Everyone talks about 4.4 to 4.8 from the quarter point on the home rule sales tax and 4 cents on the local motor fuel tax. Well, in the capital improvement fund, if dollars are transferred in for streets, those are restricted just for streets. But it's the same concept as with departmental. We transfer it in. If it's not utilized, if a project comes in under, it sticks in the capital improvement fund. The difference here is for street sidewalks and alleys is restricted for streets, sidewalks, and alleys. So we have an additional $400,000 in fund balance, so that's why we have a budget of $5 million for streets, sidewalks, and alleys. Citywide infrastructure improvements, just high level. These dollars are from fund balance. We've been accruing a lot of fund balance over the years, especially in motor fuel tax and water. So that's why some of these numbers are very high, but there are some very ambitious projects planned for the coming year. Motor fuel tax, approximately $14.1 million in improvements. Water fund, 10.8. Sewer, 4.4. Storm, approximately 1.7. The arena, this is the electrical improvements I was referring to earlier, $500,000 for improvements at the arena. The arc flash, that's one of those things, electrical safety with these big panels at the arena. And the other one is targeted to improve the lighting and potentially save money on electrical bills. So total improvements to the city, including, this is including the $1 million for the departmental, for this total, $38.3 million currently planned for capital improvement, infrastructure improvements for next year. Moving kind of fast. So what are the next steps? We need to finalize the departmental capital improvement list with meetings with the city manager. We've asked the departments to prioritize their requests. We'll make a final determination on the amount of surplus and fund balance in the capital improvement plan that we want to utilize for departmental capital improvements. And then, as we have mentioned a couple times, the remainder will go towards the capital equipment and try to start moving away from that lease. And interest rates are going up. This is something we need to do it, and it becomes more of an active component of the budget process. Because right now, the way it works, not to get into too much accounting, the lease is kind of a next year occurrence because the debt service doesn't start for a year. So when we spend money on equipment, we want it to affect the budget now. Review potential large capital improvement projects and potential new funding. City manager mentioned this. It will be going on in the discussions that we have with you coming up. Remaining 2020 budget schedule. So we'll have another one of these, a little bit more detail on February 18th, Committee of the Whole, and then the proposed budget presentation on February 25th. We'll hopefully have the proposed books to you prior to that meeting. It takes a little time to get all those together. You know, we're trying to reduce the size of those budget books. There's some redundant. Everyone's read those cover to cover, right?
Riveting.
Yes, isn't it? Step number one is to look for redundant information through the books. You know, like, are we showing revenue and expenses in the narratives and then showing it again on the reports, and trying to remove some of that activity just to reduce that volume. But I'm pretty positive you're still going to be getting 2 books. So maybe we'll do a query out to you guys to see if you really want to get those proposed books, but we'll give you the final ones for sure. Proposed budget public hearing, we need to do that. That's required. We have to adopt the proposed budget by March 15th. That's why we have it scheduled for February 25th. And then the final budget adoption on April 8th. That leaves us one additional council meeting after that as kind of a backup for that. So move kind of fast, but it was just kind of meant to give you a flavor for where we are, how we're doing, some of the material differences between last year at this time, the 2 million, and where we are right now, and kind of indicate some of the new things we're looking at, which is paying cash for equipment, recognizing the history with the vacancy savings. Questions?
Questions of Mr. Rasmussen? Alderwoman,
They hit the
Jamie?
buttons first.
They hit buttons first. Thank you.
I just wanted to know if we're going to, last year we did a budget retreat, and if we're going to do that, I would just like to put that on calendar soon so that I can make sure that I'm present for that. Just if we're not going to do it, that's great, but if we're going to do it, I just would like a proposed date so I can get it on a calendar.
Yes.
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. Scott will appreciate you asking to get that on the calendar. I know that's always one of his favorite events to be able to attend. Scott, one thing that I've asked for the last few years that's been helpful for me is just to get the budget on a CD, because then it's searchable. We don't, I don't have to knock down a couple of trees on my behalf, and there may be, some consensus to perhaps maybe do that for others too, just to save some additional costs, because I know I find that to be really helpful for me, because like I said, it's searchable and easier for me to navigate. So just something to consider. Thank you.
I think you've heard quite a few seconds to that,
Yeah,
myself included.
especially with the proposed, because I know the proposed is just it's a 2-month document, and then it gets recycled, right?
It gets recycled,
So
right.
that one I was planning on just having one for the clerk's office, maybe one for the library, and probably polling you guys to see who
Looked like you
wants
had a
a
lot
hard
of
copy,
nodding
which
heads to Alderman Sage's suggestion. Alderman Milawambwe and then Schmidt.
Yes, so I was going to ask the same question as Jamie, but I want to put just to lobby strongly for no Saturday budget presentation retreat, something. I don't see it on the calendar here.
I thought that was your favorite.
not
No,
discussed.
it is not, absolutely not.
Wow, I'm hurt.
If we can be efficient and do it in a couple of hours on a Monday evening, I'm good with that.
Thank you, Alderman Milawambwe. The Samdi.
It's okay to keep going, but we're good.
Okay, Alderwoman Schmidt and then Burgess.
I appreciated having this big aggregate number for the capital improvements, because a lot of times we see the granular amount and we think, well, there's only 5 million for this and 4 million for that. Don't need this answer tonight, but, it would be interesting to see how we're trending. 38.3 million is a good number, and, is that up? Is it down? Is it
Yes, compared to
static?
what we budgeted for this year, you're referring to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll have more side-by-side comparisons
Okay, all right. And this, I have the same kind of question with revenue. On, I don't know, it's like the second page or something, you have, for the, current budget projections and your, material differences in assumption with increases in, local use, food and beverage.
Right, we'll
that
have
kind of thing.
exhibits
Just more detail on
that
that.
will compare year over year and show the dollar and percent increases
Thank you.
or decreases.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Alderwoman Burgess.
You have next steps, finalize the department's capital improvement list. Will we have that prior to the next budget discussion, or will that be later in the process? Because I know that's a question I'll get from residents, is what are you doing? And I know that's still in progress, so it would be premature to discuss it, but I'm just wondering at what point will we discuss it?
We haven't discussed it. Did you want to answer that?
You will have it
Yeah.
prior to the next meeting.
Yeah. My anticipation was that we would have, even for motor fuel tax, all those categories, we would show the list of projects for each one of those.
Okay. Other questions? Other comments? Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Scott. Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Mr. Gleason. Then we move now to the city manager report, singular, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, upcoming agenda item for next council meeting, unless I hear otherwise under Alderman comments, is the master plan for parks that we just heard that presentation tonight. And then second meeting of every month is the finance director's report. We'll have that. There might be two additional items that we're discussing internally, but nothing too controversial. So, and then we'll shift gears to Alderman Matthews' council initiative. I'm going to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you. So this initiative I'm putting out there is to create a technology innovation commission, or it can have a different name than that, whatever we choose to name it. It's something that I've talked to Scott Sprawls about. And, we have commissions for beautification and historical buildings and things of that nature, but we don't have anything that really looks at what we are currently doing from an IT practice in the city and what we should be looking at as terms of more of a long-term planning. I'm thinking, talking to Scott, that this is like a advisory board, not a binding commission like some of them are. But my concept is to we're a very geeky city in general. We're rated that continuously on various one of America's geekiest cities and technology innovators and stuff like that. And let's start tapping the brains of some of the people and some of the thought leaders in the city who live here every day, and what are they looking at for their businesses? Where can we go? If we're looking at the city as a business, to start making smart decisions now as we're looking at as we're redoing roads. Should we be burying conduit to run fiber to new access points in the future, even if the conduit's empty right now? What technology should we be looking at around how do we use smart cells? I brought forward the initiative to switch over to LED lighting and possibly use those existing light poles as wireless access points, different things that we can do around that nature. And a large part of my thought process on this is that I think that, given the continuing rising costs that we're incurring, that it's not going to be too long before we're going to have to make do with fewer people to do the same amount of work. So how do we equip the people that are still here so that they can work as efficiently as possible to deliver the best customer service to the citizens of Bloomington? And I think that's all I'm talking about at this point, but the big things where I work with Scott, it would be an advisory commission in my mind, not a binding commission, and just people to put brain power to ideas like, open data policies. How do we collect a lot of data as a city? How do we let one of our two universities, their researchers, have access to some of that data anonymized and come back with recommendations to us? Or do we have I don't know that we have a citizen privacy policy of how we treat citizen data, and I'm not sure that's ever been defined. So there's a lot of kind of those big picture things that other people might have already dealt with and created solutions for, and we don't have to recreate that wheel entirely. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for coming in under budget there. Is there council interest, or is there, let me rephrase it because I saw a couple nodding heads. Is there any objection to having this put on as a discussion action item in a future council meeting?
I think
Alderman.
I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea. I would like to clarify, Jamie, are we talking about this being internal to IT, or are we talking about this in a little bit larger sense of, thinking about economic development and maybe how it intersects with planning commission issues? I mean, I don't know. I don't have anything
I was
specific
thinking
in
more of
mind.
that big picture
The
idea to
external-
talk about,
Inward, not just inward looking, but outward looking.
yeah, well, both, right? How do we use technology to change internal processes that help us face outward in a better situation? Are there more opportunities to partner with the town of Normal, McLean County, where we can share resources together, or create a standardized open data policy where all three entities operate under one policy so that wherever you live, you know how we're going to treat the data, where it's going to be anonymized and there's no identifiable properties to that. I think there's a lot of opportunities for partnering with the other organizations in our area. It could be with Vasu and the Regional Planning Office and some of the stuff she brought in the Smart Cities presentation last year, or the EDC. I think there's a lot of opportunities that are available.
I think it's a great idea. Thanks for bringing this forward.
Alderman Millamway?
Yeah, so I guess I had kind of similar questions to what Karen was asking, and basically wanting to understand how this was going to work. Because and how much staff time is involved. I think it's a good idea to look at technology and try to be as forward as we can. But my concern is usually with how it can impact staff, and whether or not this is going to be something that's going to create more work for the staff. Because I know when it's true that technology can be can enhance, and make people more efficient, but at the same time, it can also create, separate processes that make it a little bit more time consuming for people to have to work with. So just, in general, I would say I like the idea of us being a little bit more forward-thinking with the staff. Just some questions about how this is all going to play out.
Right. And I think that would be one, assuming sounded like there were no objections for us bringing this to the council, those are the kinds of things that we would explore in the council discussion of a specific proposal, and say, okay, well, if we did this, there might be some additional staff burdens, but we think that's worth it, or if we did it this way, it wouldn't be, again, that would be our decision, obviously.
And I do like the fact that you brought up that it would be advisory, not binding, because I know sometimes when it's, if it is binding, and, that can create some issues with the staff, so we need to have a little bit of flexibility, because sometimes when people bring an activist mentality to, to the work that they do, and if it's binding, then this is what has to go, and it makes things a little bit more difficult for staff. So I like the idea that it's advisory.
Okay. Thank you. Alderwoman Painter.
I think this is a great idea. I think it's really been a long time coming that we do something like this. But I do think that we need to be very careful about who gets appointed to this particular advisory committee. I think we need people that actually know something about technology that are on this committee, and make sure that it's not a political football, but it's something that actually will move us forward. Thank you.
I have a list of people that I would like to propose, if this is something we move forward, that and all of you, every one of you, of course, can weigh in on it, but they're people that have been in the community for 20 or more years working in technology and doing things and looking forward. So I do have probably a half a dozen people that I would be interested in putting forward and saying these might be the kind of people who don't care about the politics of it, but they're far more interested in the future aspects of what we can do for it.
I also think it's important too, though, that we have people that are brand new out of college that are into this, or maybe people that just have certificates that are young. I mean, we need to keep moving forward with this. Thanks.
And I think that's some of what the publicity that we'll get out of the discussion and then the actual, follow through, will, and then certainly we can contact people at the computer science departments at Illinois Wesleyan, Illinois State, Heartland, to make sure that we have a broad group of people. Our millennial council person isn't here to speak in favor of that tonight. So anyway, Alderman Millawamboy, last note.
I like what Alderwoman Painter brought up, to have people who actually know about technology, but the counterpoint is also good, because you need some people who don't necessarily understand technology, so that we understand what the impact on those people will be as well. There you go. So.
At least that's what my kids tell me. They roll their eyes when I ask stupid questions about my smartphone. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie. And it looks like that's the case at this point. My glasses, but it looks like what we were at the point of adjourning. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman Howman. Is there a second? Second by Alderwoman Schmidt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And we are 36 minutes under budget. Yeah.